Hello, good evening. We're going to get started. I want to thank you for coming to this program, a conversation between AfriCobra and Otabenga Jones Associates. I'm Michael D. Harris, the consulting curator of African American art here at the High, and also since 1979, a member of AfriCobra. And because of that, I will not be on stage participating very much in the discussion. The idea for this discussion and presentation came out of the important exhibitions presently at the High Museum. Julian Cox's Freedom Road, Civil Rights Photography from 1956 to 68, and Jeffrey Groves after 1968, and Jeffrey is joining us here tonight. And these are two of the most important exhibitions that have been at the High Museum dealing with black subject matter or having African American artists participating, and this is a wonderful time for them to happen. With these shows, this year's NBAF commemorating the 40th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination and the 20th anniversary of the National Black Arts Festival. Also, though not a part of the formalities, this year marks the 40th anniversary of the founding of AfriCobra. So I thought this would be a perfect time to have this kind of discussion, since we have these young artists who have formed a group and have some interesting approaches to talk with artists who formed a group a generation before. Jeff Donaldson, who's a founding member and the genius behind AfriCobra's growth and development, had an idea about trans-African art. This is a way of describing aesthetic and thematic similarities among cultural forms in Africa and the African diaspora that are marked by the specifics of their location while sharing certain sensibilities and formalities. Musically, we can find rhythmic qualities as well as creative crosstalk between West African juju and high life, Jamaican ska and reggae, American blues, gospel, R&B, and hip-hop, Martinican zouk, and perhaps Trinidadian calypso. And certainly it's there in the Olodum drumming of Bahia, Brazil. We have to look also at Afro-Cuban mambo and the black origins of tango, as documented by Robert Farris Thompson in his recent book. The sacred and the secular are seldom far apart in the African world. Religion often facilitates or is the foundation of these cultural commonalities through New World variations of African religions. Examples are Haitian Vodou, Cuban Santeria or Lukumi, as well as Palomonte, and Brazilian Umbanda and Candomblé. Visually, there are certain approaches to color, perspective, and pattern that show up in the art, but what is important to this discussion are the factors of communal consciousness and the approach to the art and the penchant for forming groups that one finds all over the transatlantic world, but not so often in Western art since the Gothic period. There was a group in Mali, Bogolon Fini, that used the famous Bogolon mudcloth tradition as a jumping off point. In Nigeria, there was Ona in Ile-Ife, and they were the subject of my dissertation, actually, one of the subjects, and Aka, a group word meaning the hand, in Nsuka. Ona is a word for design or art in Yoruba. In the New World, we've had groups like Because in the Bahamas, the Bahamian Creative Artists United for Serious Expression. We have group Fromage in Martinique in the 1980s, and incidentally, Afrocobra exhibited with fromage, a term referring to a baobab tree, not cheese, in 1987 in Martinique, and again in 1989 at Howard University. In the United States, during the civil rights and black arts era, groups formed like Spiral in New York, which included Romare Bearden, Emma Amos, Hale Woodruff, and Richard Mayhew, among others. We have YUC, or Wayusi Naumba Ya Sana, Swahili for the Black House of Art. An example here is Ademola Olukbifola's work. They formed in New York. We have Obasi in Chicago, an organization with a musical, literary, and visual arts component. And coming out of Obasi, we have Afrocobra, first as Cobra, then as Afrocobra, when it was discovered that there was a group in Europe, Cobra, which stood for Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. Afrocobra worked to create an African-American aesthetic, and here's some of the other examples. Moyo Okedeji is one of the artists who was in Ona in Nigeria, and then this is Because from the Bahamas, with a couple of artists, representative artists, and these are works from Groupe Fromage from Martinique. Afrocobra worked to create an African-American aesthetic that could be articulated. The seminal Wall of Respect from 1967 in Chicago, which was a collaborative project including several artists who would become a part of Afrocobra the next year, responded to the lack of visibility in popular culture and media that blacks endured at that time, and the fact that most of the images presented were either stereotypical archetypes or associated with negative connotations. And they felt a need to present positive, heroic figures to the community. There was a call and response interaction with the community during the painting of the mural, and this is what Jeff Donaldson told me in conversations. People talked with the artists as they worked and commented upon the work, and at times shared food and drink with the artists. And Afrocobra sought to create a visual aesthetic that would capture the spirit, heritage, color, and rhythm of this community in their work, an imagery they could relate to during a time when the mainstream art world was dominated by abstract expressionism, pop art, and the growth of minimalism. Among the principles articulated in early Afrocobra discussions were an atavistic aesthetic, technical excellence, social responsibility, awesome imagery, free symmetry, high intensity or Kool-Aid colors, and shine. Napoleon Jones Henderson and Nelson Stevens, two Afrocobra artists who were in Chicago in the very early years, will talk more about the group's motivation and ideas. Kevin Cole of Atlanta has become our youngest member, and Frank Smith is in town. And the members of Otabenga Jones and Associates, who are all here, thankfully, so this is a real treat. Robert Pruitt, Jabari Anderson, Kenya Evans, and Jamal Cyrus will talk about how they came together as a group a generation later. Both groups share an affinity and respect of the work of the late John Biggers, and the stated purpose of Ota Benga Jones links it to the Black Power and Black Arts movement and ideas which spawned Afrocobra. I thought a dialogue would be fascinating, and this would be a unique opportunity. So first, the elders will come and talk for a few minutes about Afrocobra. Then Ota Benga Jones will talk a little bit about what they're about and how they came about, and then we'll have a dialogue on stage. So Nelson and Napoleon.
Good afternoon, or should I say good early evening. My name is Napoleon Jones Henderson, as Michael has stated, and I guess he's properly identified me in some context as one of the elders. There's a privilege and an honor for that, and longevity does have its benefits, as someone who is from this illustrious town has said before. And he has been much a part of the mix of the works of Afrocobra. The images, I will not speak to them in terms of a particular dialogue about each and every one of them. I will, though, try to share with you the principal concern of Afrocobra, which was social responsibility and the engagement of the political process, in the sense of looking at the imagery that we created as a language to communicate the issues and concerns of African people worldwide. Afrocobra has always initiated a worldwide sense of awareness among ourselves and the community in which we are a part of. And actually, some of the elements that are a part of Afrocobra in its most basic motivating elements are the aspect of speaking about our heritage and our endless development of creativity, and that we were brought together out of a consensus of purpose and need for the language of visual art speaking to the people. And we were a part of the people, as referenced by Michael to the Wall of Respect. That was a communal exercise that partook of not only the visual artists themselves, ourselves, the musicians, poets, dramatists, and the community itself. Some of the principles of Afrocobra is to deal with the elements that are most apparent within the context of the African community worldwide. Particularly when we look at the African American in this context, we talk about things such as the act of the human figure, lost and found line, the sense of lettering as an image for itself and a manner of communicating ideas beyond just simple forms and shapes that are the principal language and instruments of visual artists. Images that identify social, economic, and political circumstances around the world, as well as within our community, and the understanding of the basic Afrocentric aesthetics which we saw and lived on a daily basis. Technical excellence is a part of that. And within the context of the works we're looking at here, these are primarily works that are done on paper. Afrocobra, one of its basic tenets, beyond being the highest executioners as possible of the visual form, was to also make and demystify those elements that are most often given to us in art institutions and schools, the rarefication of art being such a high and aloof type of enterprise, but that art is a very basic and everyday enterprise of the African life. And the images that we created were principally for the purpose of dissemination to the larger population by means of utilizing one of the forms that is most often referred to as one of the most democratic forms of artistic expression, is printmaking. It's a principal element of Afrocobra, and the element of printmaking allowed for Afrocobra to have its works in the hands of the largest number of individuals, giving a credence to the aspect that art is for the people, and that element which was shared not only by Afrocobra but by many other members of art associations as well as political and social organizations. Black Panther Party is one in very forward in that particular sense of thinking about art for the people and the purpose of creating works of art that spoke to daily issues, as well as works that were exciting, aesthetically pleasing, and exemplary in the sense of their execution of the mastery of the technique and skills that many of us were trained in traditional art institutions, as well as some of us who were not trained in those institutions. And there is no distinction between being trained in an institution or not. The criteria for Afrocobra is excellence and concern for political and social responsibility. And some of the elements that we also used was the aspect of emphasizing awesome imagery, and that imagery has been seen in some of the works by Barbara Jones in the earlier images that were cast on the screen above, her particular prints, and she was primarily the source behind which we saw the need and the possibility of the larger dissemination of our images from the individual manners of execution in which we were painting. I'm a textile artist, and other manners of artistic expression by way of print. And our actual very first print was done at the first Black Expo held in Chicago by the organization of Jesse Jackson's Push. And the elements of not only shine, the use of Kool-Aid colors, and all of us who are, especially if we are elder enough, we know what Kool-Aid is, and I assume it's probably still being made. But the colors of Kool-Aid were some of the vibrant colors that we were quite fully and comfortable in wearing within the context of our daily attire in the community. And one of the interesting aspects of the compositional component to Afrocobra's work is the aspect of jam-pack and jelly roll tight. And that means to have the compositional space from top to bottom, left to right, fully engrossed in visual language. And in the general context, I will pass this over to Nelson because we are in basically the process and the endeavor of creating what we call visual music.
Good evening. My name is Nelson Stevens. I'm a retired professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I was there for like 33 years. I started teaching junior high in the early 60s in Cleveland. I'm one of the few Afrocobra members from the right coast. Brooklyn, New York, born and raised. Started going to the museum on the trips. We had art teachers. They recommended me for Museum of Modern Art classes. So I saw Alfredo Lamb's paintings. Well, the first one was Museum of Modern Art when I was a very young kid, and thought that Picasso's Guernica belonged there, because when I was a kid, that's where it was exhibited. Why is that important? Because Afrocobra is important about murals. Any time you give me a chance to talk about murals, that's what I'll be doing. I did a mural at Tuskegee. I've been trying to get over there to look at it. I haven't been able to do it for years. But their centennial, which was 30 years ago. I did the mural there. What I did was, I got to Chicago late. I got to Chicago in '69. Afrocobra begins in '68. Napoleon and I come in at the same time. And those were great days. I think everybody was about 8'6" tall. Afrocobra starts with, you gotta understand, 3 women too. Barbara Jones, Jay Jarrell, and Carol and Lawrence. Very fine women. So when we joined, out of the first 10, there's 3 women. But out of the first 7, 6, 3 women. If you understand my math there. There's a painting of mine, this is where I painted, and Afrocobra always liked the idea of including the word in the painting. So you can see it over there on the right-hand side. Jeff Donaldson, the titular head, our stern big brother. I met him at in 1969, in the winter, at the College Art Association conference, because I was going to get a job. I had applied, my wife and I applied for about jobs there. We went, you had to get jobs at the College of Art, that's where it happens. That's where I met him. He told me about Africoma. I chose a job close to Chicago. This is his marriage painting. Another by Jeff Donaldson. He liked the idea of weapons, weaponry. Another founding member of Africoma, Gerald Williams. He was just ahead of me. He's here today, too. Gerald, raise your hand, please. There he is. And I would say he was the most improved member we ever had, which brings in the whole idea of critiquing, which we were very big about. And this was Barbara, another great print. That's me. Thank you very much. Take care.
And now, Ota Benga Jones will give us insight into their origins and ideas. Come on up.
How y'all doing? My name is Robert Pruitt. I'm 1/4 of Ota Benga Jones Associates. The other members are in the audience. We're all going to come up in a minute. I'm just going to talk about some of our projects. A lot of times it's easier for us to kind of talk about who we are as it goes through some of the projects we've done. But it's 4 of us. We are an organization with 4 members and 1 fictional leader. His name is Ota Benga Jones. And so we all take our directions from this person that we've kind of made up. And this person is an elder to us who has been through all these different political organizations and movements through sort of black history, the UNIA movement with Marcus Garvey, Panthers, all of that. So it's a way for us to kind of connect with some of those histories. So I'm going to start with this piece we did called We Did It for Love. And it's, for us, kind of a sculptural monument to some of the uprisings that took place in the 60s. And a lot of our work kind of begins out of that moment of resistance. We were all born in the 70s, so, obviously we weren't around for these things, but I think we kind of consider ourselves maybe the children of that spirit, of that moment, and trying to look back at it and pull from it the relevant and like useful materials. And so we look back at these things and to create our work and kind of try to get a larger message out. So this was part of an exhibition at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. So we took this car, turned it into a police car, and flipped it as if it had been flipped in a riot. And there was a musical audio piece that goes along with it that played the broadcast recordings from the Watts riots in '65, along with like some musical elements that we had mixed together. This is a protest we did of the Fine Arts Museum in Houston, Museum of Fine Arts Houston. They had an exhibition called African Art Now, the works in the John Pygmy collection. I might be getting the title a little bit messed up, but it was a work of contemporary African art that we didn't feel took into consideration the breadth of Africa that it's kind of stated in its title and in its sort of approach. It didn't take into account everything and kind of maybe we felt furthered some of the same ignorance a lot of people still hold about the continent. And so as a way to kind of maybe be in between people going into the museum and trying to like put out some more information, we staged a protest. We tried to get, a lot of the different black artists, we're connected with a lot of black artists in the city. We tried to get them to come out and support us. And so again, like going back to the 60s where that sort of spirit of resistance was alive, in doing it in, what was this, like '04 maybe, '05 or '06 or so, I don't remember the date. But nobody would do it with us. So we ended up just the two of us out there protesting. We still did it, and it was really kind of funny. Like, we were never having done this again. We didn't grow up protesting, so we were a little nervous about it, trying to look up the laws for like what happens if the police come and this and that, and I think maybe like the typical kind of postmodern style, the museum just kind of was like, oh, that's kind of cute, it's kind of sweet, So it was us kind of dealing with how to approach this stuff. So, I don't know. That's just kind of what happened. So then we moved to a different strategy about this kind of information and in dealing with museums. This is a project we had last year at the Menil Collection in Houston. And the Menil Collection is it's like one of the best museums in the city, I think. And they have this huge archive of material, paintings, drawings, all kinds of stuff. And every now and then they invite artists to come, go through their archives, and create an exhibition based on the materials that they have. I think it was a project begun like years ago that I think Andy Warhol did like the initial project like that, and they've been trying to reproduce it since. I think before us, Robert Gober was the last person to come in and do it. And then when we came in, we weren't necessarily that interested in like maybe some of the paintings and drawings, but they have a huge African art collection, and so we were kind of just trying to go in and see that stuff. But in digging through it, we found that they had all the stuff from like the 60s and 70s that, there was a Black Star Line stock certificate. I have an image of that I'm going to show in a minute. But just they had this material that, because they were sort of supporters of some of these social movements, which we also found out about the couple, the Menils, who started the museum, were big supporters of like the local chapter of the Panthers in Houston and all these different things going on. So they had collected posters and just a bunch of stuff. So we took this material and we created a classroom that was based on the Saturday classes that the Black Panthers would hold. And so every Saturday we would bring in a speaker who would then sort of teach this classroom. It was open to the public. People could come by and teach a class kind of based on some of the materials we had present. So, it was really great. People would come in every Saturday. Amir Baraka was, I think, the last speaker we had, but we had Deb Willis, who I think she actually has an opening here in town tonight. I'm not sure exactly where. But Alvia Wardlaw, who's a curator in Houston, Jihad Abdul Mumit, who was a former Panther, a former member of the Black Liberation Army. We had a local poet, Obadike Kumau, who also runs a library at Texas Southern University, where Otabenga Jones met. We all kind of met at that school. So it was really cool. And I think probably one of the better strategies for us, and I think it kind of leads to how we kind of operate now, which in trying to engage people in like a different sort of way. So this is the Black Star Line certificate. I went too fast, but I don't know. I was really impressed by seeing this. I read about the Black Star Line, Marcus Garvey, the UNIA movement, and then to actually see like the physical object of it was really special to me. So again, just kind of they had Andy Warhol with Chairman Mao and these different paintings, and then we also included our own archive. So this was a commemorative poster for Carl Hampton, who was a local revolutionary in Houston. And so we just mixed all this stuff up in the exhibition, and then this is 2 record albums from our collection, archives, whatever you want to call it. This is a piece we did at a gallery in Dallas called Nation Time Traffic, where it's sort of about the acquisition of land by African Americans and sort of the difficulty of sort of owning, not necessarily communal land, but like the collective owning of land. And so we sort of set about the idea of packaging small parcels of earth to distribute to people, so that hopefully one day we'll have so many of these bricks that we can all put it together and have all this black land. But in the packaging of it, it kind of mimics how you would find like bricks of cocaine or heroin or something. So we made these bricks and packaged them up, and I think some of them had to be driven from Houston to Dallas, where it was. So I was a little nervous about kind of making that drive and traveling. and it was all sort of like about the performance of it. This is us just installing it, and then this is the installation of it. And along with it, we kind of wrote this fictional narrative of sort of the drive, kind of trying to create this narrative around it, but of, you know, us kind of having an encounter with the police and it being misconstrued and blah, blah, blah. We can talk about that later. I want to get through it. And then someone sort of experiencing it and reading it. And so so people reading that thought it was true, and we play around with that sometimes. So. And then this is our most recent project at a museum in Houston called the Station Museum. There's Emory Douglas, who was the Minister of Culture for the Black Panthers, has an exhibition that's been kind of moving around the country. And some of his work was brought to this museum in Houston as the focal point, and then they invited Ota Benga Jones Associates and then a collective out of Mexico called Asaro to do kind of bookend installations around his exhibition, sort of being inspired by the Panthers and his artwork. And so what we did was recreate one of the Panther programs, which was a community film program. So we turned our part of the gallery into an old high school gymnasium, sort of as if the Panthers had taken it over, and we show film screenings every Sunday. So if anybody's in Houston this Sunday, I don't know, we're showing a film on Sunday. So I think this is the last image I have, but that's sort of what we do, installations, performances, and just kind of enjoying ourselves. So. That's right.
So if we could get all the artists to come up on stage, let's talk a little bit. Well, I'd like to ask a question. It's very interesting, the shift from an aesthetic to an emphasis on context and performance and ideas. But the first, I guess the obvious question, particularly for Ota Benga Jones, is how you reconcile being in a group with the whole notion of artistic individuality. How do you reconcile that? How do you handle that?
Well, personally for myself, I prefer doing the group aspect because it takes so much pressure off of, I don't have to come up with all the ideas. I don't have to decide what's going where, how's this going to work out. So, I mean, and it's a little different for us because we started in 2002 and we met in 94. So all of that time, even though we met at school, we've lived together, traveled together, and it's put us in a more intimate position with each other versus 4 artists who've decided to come together to create art. So it's
well, the other thing is we also have our own individual art practices and studio practices, and and so as an artist, we have both sides. We have the individuality and of working in the studio, and we also have of trying to figure out ideas with a group of 3 or 4 people, and so I think it's for us it's just been a manner of trying to find balance, or of accepting this balance.
Hmm.
Michael, could you step back for just a minute and ask each of the artists of Ota Benga to introduce themselves individually, since we haven't heard their names or learned anything about them?
I'm sorry. My name is Dawalu Jabari Anderson. I go by Jabari. My individual works, I do drawings on paper, large, large-scale comic book covers. I didn't catch the rest of the question. Was that it?
Okay.
In what medium?
I make my own paper. I use marker, acrylic, latex.
My name is Kenya Evans. I do large-scale paintings, as well as sound art and music.
My name is Jamal Cyrus. Right now I'm working as an individual working on a set of drawings that are based on FBI memorandums and documents. Also do videos and sculptures.
And Robert, like I said, I do large-scale drawings on paper and some found object sculptures.
Just going back to your question, I was thinking, because I was taking notes when the brother was talking, that unlike Africobra, where you said that you all were brought together out of a purpose and a need, I think because of our generation, that same type of immediate need did not exist, or at least it wasn't as overt as the generation before us. And I think all of us coming out of this era of hip-hop, where it turned political between 89 and 93, and we had all these type of ideas, but it was the friendship, the way it started off with us, and knowing each other for, I guess at that time, for 12 or 13 years. And so, naturally, a big part of it was the friendship, but also the ideas that we had coming out of the Texas Southern University Art Department, the John Biggers Art Department, and also being involved in Project Row Houses, which is a nonprofit organization out of Houston, Texas. And so I think those were those binding factors, and it was that our aesthetic and the histories that we cover that brought us into what we're doing now.
And this is for any and everyone. What do you want your art to do? It's a question about audience, about who your audience is, and what do you want your art to do for the black community, if anything? Or do you have a broader target? What is the intentionality regarding audience?
Well, I'll run with this one for a piece.
This whole idea of intentionality and stuff, excuse me, my brother.
Right on, my brother.
I went looking at a bookstore here recently under African American art books. I was amazed. I've been teaching this course for 30 years. When we first started 30 years ago, 34, 33 years ago, there were 2 texts. Now there's a multiplicity. Some of it's good, some it's not so good, but it's there. You can't even compare the times. I'm following the Olympics, and our Olympics is like 68 with fist raised high. The Olympic champions now, we got to test them for drugs to make sure whatever's happening. There's a whole different thing. The world is different. I admire these brothers for being able to get together because there is so much trying to keep them apart. As there was with Africobra, what we tried to do in Chicago was to lock up the talent base. Lock up the talent base. Lock up the head on the talent base. We have, is that Bobby? This is Bobby's sister. I know it's important. And what we're talking about is locking up the talent base, dealing with excellence and projecting images that have been sharpened by each other sometimes. It don't have to be about you. It can be sharpened by each other. Jeff had a thing about Africoba. It was that we didn't collect smooth stones. We got rough stones in order to make sparks.
Anybody from Ota Benga want to address audience concerns? How do you think about that?
We like I said, we all have our individual practices, and showing, we show that work in museums and galleries, and it's a little unsatisfying. Obviously, the museum does not have its finger on the kind of community that we come out of or hope to address. And so I think what we try to do, since we seem to have been able to place ourselves in that space, is try to use museum resources to take that work into other spaces, or bring a different kind of thought in and allow those communities to come in a different manner, not necessarily to come in to appreciate work in a museum that doesn't reflect them, but to come in and gather some very important information and history. So I think our audience is still at the thrust of it is those communities that we come from, and then how we can maybe broaden out from there. I don't think we close it off there, but that's where it begins.
I read an article a while ago by Oop Hanners who talks about refugees moving into, let's say, African refugees or somewhere moving into Western capitals, and rather than being members of their capitals, they become extensions of their home circumstance. Would that be how you consider yourself in a museum setting, as the voice of your community in that setting, if you don't feel like you're addressing that same audience? Do you feel like you're addressing the museum audience as the voice of that community? Napoleon or anybody?
Well, I guess my response to that would be that as Africoba birthed itself out of the Wall of Respect in Chicago, which is clearly a community point of view, a focus of the audience being where the work resides. Whether the work is in a, quote, museum or in the community, the element for me, I think, which is most important is whether there is relevancy in the work. If the work doesn't have any relevancy, it wouldn't matter whether it was in a museum or in the community. And I think if we were to approach it from the point of view of the work's importance to the audience we wish to address, then that hurdle of where it's put is virtually unimportant, except that it happens to be a vehicle by which those we want to address the work can access that work. So I think it's a futile more than fruitful endeavor to try to force, if you will, a square peg into a round hole. Something's got to give some kind of way. And moreover, if your issue is the square peg, then focus on that, cultivate that, make that happen. And that round hole, if it's of any importance, will shape itself to that square peg. And I'm not saying in any way that that reshaping causes it to be any less, any different from what its original focus was as a circle, but it still has, it doesn't cause you to really violate your own principles or the audience in which you really seriously wish to address. Time proves itself. I guess that's a part of being an elder, being a mature brother here. You can see some of the things that you thought needed to be changed at one point in time and the manner in which you went about making that change, that if one stays true to the struggle, the goal will be achieved. and it necessarily doesn't have to be achieved where you might first decide that's where you want to have it achieved at.
Well, in your presentation, Robert, you mentioned Afrocobra, and I'm not sure exactly how aware you were of Afrocobra when you were growing up, but I wonder if you all have questions that you'd like to ask each other now that you are more aware of each other, Ota Benga and Afrocobra.
My question would be to them would be about audience. And how did you come to reach and connect? First of all, I guess, do you feel that you were successful in reaching the audience that you intended to reach? And if so, like, what type of process was that? Was it something that happened immediately? Is it something that y'all had to work out, over a course of years? Is it something that you're still trying to work out? So that would be my question.
We had an exhibit at the Studio Museum, first exhibit, 1970. And what we did was to ask people, if you could afford it, which one of the images would you most prefer? So when we got back to Chicago, we had a listing of the most popular image by an African American audience in Studio Museum. And that was the image that we chose to make some screens of in order to sell back to the people who had already chosen.
And as a footnote, Atlanta's Ed Spriggs was the director of the Studio
At the
Museum.
Studio Museum at that time, yes he was.
And he made that show happen.
Yeah. Ed Spriggs is very important in terms of Black Arts Movement. Larry Neal, very important in terms of Black Arts Movement. Mary Baraka, very important in terms of Black Arts Movement. Larry Neal, personal friend of mine and big influence in my life, as well as Jeff Donaldson, two 8-foot people that I'm talking about. My point is what?
The audience.
Audience. How do you get the audience? You ask them what they want, you give it to them out of that method that we chose that way.
And Nap, do you have any questions for these young men?
No specific questions. I have an observation I'd like to share, which is that, and this is somewhat on your comment relative to the interpersonal relationships of each of you, and the element of individual practice, is Afrocobra. This is our 40th year as an organization, so that's probably older than any of you brothers. That is directly the result of truly very strong and continuing friendships. We were first and foremost friends. We are still first and foremost friends. And even to the extent of our individual practice, what it is that is the most valuable and endearing aspect of Afrocobra was the sense of oneness. We were a collective, which is different than a group, which is different than an association, which is different than a club, and all these other sort of things. A collective, and the manner in which we dealt with developing and cultivating that friendship was through the sharing of a process which we still engage in very actively, is critiques. We would bring our works to our meetings. We would have very animated discussions about that work, and we helped each other grow. And so based on the principles of Afrocobra that we set up, and that particular friendship and the engagement of the community in which we were a part of and which we were concerned about addressing, has caused AfriCobra to continue to be a body for 40 years, which is something, if my history serves me correctly, has not been done by any other group, association, or otherwise of artists in this country, irrespective of ethnicity or otherwise. So that in and of itself, I think, is a benchmark of our friendship. But that friendship, though, isn't exclusive to AfriCobra. It's expansive in terms of some of the groups we saw up here. Wiusi, our other group we met and had an association with in Martinique, Fromager, and the untold numbers of students that all of us, as Nelson's indicated, 33 years at UMass Amherst, and all the rest of us, Howard University, and so forth and so on. We have, by extension, given that friendship and that communal sense over to untold numbers of young, aspiring, and successful at this moment, many image makers. And the sense of that sharing, I think, is something I see in terms of how you brothers approach your work. And I would just offer out to say that your individual practice won't suffer from your sharing and your collective sense of oneness. And the oneness is the issue that is there. If you have that sense of oneness, I think you will be successful in continuing along that journey.
So, Kenya, do you have anything you'd like to kick back?
It's good to hear that we're on the right track, hopefully.
Oh, absolutely.
Hopefully
Absolutely.
we'll be around for 40 years.
What I noticed is that, and I see a distinct difference, when we talk about critiques, you know, we're dealing with traditional artworks, but there's more of a performance aspect to what you do. And even though we deal with music in reference, your practice is almost like the World Saxophone Quartet, you know, and I think that's fascinating. But we have time constraints here. What I would like to do is invite the audience to come and up and talk to these artists, you know, down here, and have that kind of communal exchange in an informal way. And I really would like to thank you all for coming, and I hope this is just the first of these kinds of exchanges that we share as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, sir.
We've lost two members recently. Jeff Donaldson died in 2004. Being the legendary figure he was, he died on Leap Year Day. And recently this year we lost Murray DePillars. So Frank Smith and Kevin Cole are here. And we have
Kevin Cole is our newest member.
And three members are no longer, are not here. Could not make the trip: Andrew Cowens, James Phillips, and Akili Ron Anderson. And we occasionally take on new members, not very often. We meet once or twice a year, not as much as we did when we lived in one place. But there's a great deal of discussion and voting before memberships are taken on. We have 7 now. Is it? Am I 8? No, wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 8 members now. We're down 2. And we hope to talk about new members soon.
Well, one of the other things, in reference to your question, part of your question about how often do we meet, is that there's a critical mass of them in Baltimore. James, Frank, Nelson, they are in Baltimore, Maryland, and Akili is right up the road in Washington, D.C. And as we all individually travel around the country, we're always meeting formally or informally when we get together anyway. So we are always, in a sense, we're always meeting. We just don't get together physically in a formal context as often as we once did, for many reasons.
In our early days in Chicago, we'd meet every other Sunday with work that was wet, acrylic, but something that was done since the last meeting. And we started giving problems, the ideal this, the ideal that, land, issues of black people, what's the family, black family, different kinds of things like that. As a matter of fact, Gerald Williams, his first print was probably the most severe because it was called the King Alfred Program. And the King Alfred Program was removal of black people from the communities through the network of highways which had gone in.
So let's continue the questions as we get everybody down so we can continue.
Well, I think it might be, okay.